there is a concern to me that it sounds like more of the same. It's yet to be seen. The other thing that worries me about this, and I am going to change the gears on this slightly just to bring it in, there seems to be a lot of money for war and arms, and yet we cannot spend 1.4 billion to keep poor pensioners warm in the winter. I don't know why that's funny, Chris, because I don't find
I've said this before.
Why are you laughing?
Because it's the winter cruise allowance. Means testing, elderly people for winter fuel payments is fine. If you're rich and you've got enough money, the whole household support fund was set up to help those that needed it. It was extra 2 million in Tower Hamlets where I live. The fact that we're talking about Rachel Reeves, who's got securenomics, by the way, that's been fiscal discipline. We've seen the debt to GDP ratio come from 95% down to 93% within 1 year. Yes, there's been difficulties with bond markets moving, but ultimately, when it comes down to our security and our sovereignty, we've got to make sure that we're putting money in the right places. And if that means...
But we're spending more on net zero.
If that means...
So if that's so important...
That's energy security. It's all part of it.
That's ridiculous.
Cost of living crisis. Bring the costs down. Yes,
we're spending more on net zero than we are on arms to go to Ukraine. If that was if that was the case, right, and Keir Starmer said, right, we're going to scrap net zero and we're going to spend more on defence and put that into... I'd have a little bit of respect for him. But he's not. He's spending more on net zero. He's taking money away from pensioners. He's got absolutely no... It's absolutely bonkers, this inheritance tax on farmers. And yet we can always find this money to send abroad. And don't get me wrong, it's for a good cause. But what about the British people?
Well, look, the economic policy that's underpinning Rachel...
Thank you so much, Minister, for being able to join us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Government budgets are a reflection of national priorities, and in recent years, those priorities have been increasingly skewed. While pensioners struggle to afford basic necessities and households grapple with soaring energy costs, billions are funneled into military expenditures and foreign aid. This imbalance raises urgent questions about whether government spending is being directed where it is truly needed. At the heart of the issue is the disproportionate focus on defense spending. The government continues to allocate vast sums to arms and military initiatives, often under the guise of national security. While a strong defense is undoubtedly important, the extent of these allocations appears excessive when juxtaposed against the economic hardships facing ordinary citizens. Struggling pensioners, who have contributed to society for decades, are left to fend for themselves with meager state support. This is not just an oversight, it is a glaring failure of responsibility. Similarly, the cost of living crisis continues to ravage households across the country. Energy bills have skyrocketed, placing immense financial strain on families and businesses alike. The government has committed substantial funds to net zero initiatives, an essential long-term goal, but these investments must be balanced with immediate relief for those suffering in the present. Energy security should be prioritized in a way that ensures affordability and stability for all citizens, rather than simply pursuing ambitious environmental targets without adequate support mechanisms. Adding to the controversy is the allocation of foreign aid. While humanitarian efforts are commendable, sending billions abroad when domestic citizens are in distress is a difficult pill to swallow. Farmers, another critical pillar of the economy, are also being left behind. Instead of ensuring food security and supporting domestic agriculture, policymakers are redirecting funds to global initiatives, further marginalizing those who sustain the nation's food supply. This pattern of misguided priorities underscores a fundamental disconnect between government decision-making and the realities faced by everyday citizens. A more balanced approach is desperately needed, one that prioritizes pensioners, strengthens domestic energy security, and supports struggling households over excessive military spending and foreign aid commitments. If the government truly seeks to serve its people, it must reassess its financial priorities. Redirecting funds toward those who need them most, pensioners, farmers, and working families, would not only alleviate economic hardship, but also restore faith in a system that increasingly appears indifferent to the struggles of its own citizens. Until then, government spending remains a reflection not of necessity, but of misplaced priorities.
As of all of this nonsense seen in the Mail and various people saying that we've got to withdraw the state visit, absolute garbage.
Yeah.
As juvenile stupidity, we should be doubling
But wasn't
down.
that a bit of a ridiculous move, though, as well?
What we should be doing is, at the end of the day, the British monarchy is probably the most loved around the world. It's our greatest piece of soft power, and we should be using it as much as we can. And the President Trump had a huge affection for the late Queen, loves the British royal family, and so we should be using that. These people sort of short-term headlines, cancel the state visit. It's pathetic. It's juvenile.
It's particularly pathetic getting their knickers in a twist about, people shouting at one another. Zelensky doesn't care. He's already said he's going to rebuild whatever the relations he needs to have with the Americans. I mean, he's a man that's been involved in a war for 3 years. I don't think getting shouted at by Donald Trump a little bit is going to bother him.
And actually, do you know...
And also, by the way, he was shouted at by Joe Biden as well.
And I'm not going to criticise the leaders who are trying to secure peace. It's really difficult.
The deputy leader of Reform U, Richard Tice, has hit out at calls to cancel former U.S. President Donald Trump's anticipated visit with the royal family, branding such suggestions as absolute garbage and a demonstration of juvenile stupidity. The controversy follows Trump's recent remarks about Ukraine, which resulted in a tense exchange with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. The spat has reignited debates over Trump's global influence, as well as his contentious standing among Western allies. Critics have argued that hosting Trump amid ongoing geopolitical tensions, particularly as the U.S. approaches a critical election, would send the wrong message to the international community. However, Tice is having none of it. "We should be doubling down, not backing away," he declared. "This is about the special relationship between the UK and the United States. To even suggest canceling his visit because of some political spat is absurd." Trump, a polarizing figure on both sides of the Atlantic, has maintained strong support among right-wing factions in the UK, including members of Reform UK, which has positioned itself as a challenger to the Conservative Party from the right. The former president's previous state visit in 2019 was met with mass protests in London, with opposition figures, including then Mayor Sadiq Khan, fiercely critical of his policies and rhetoric. Yet, with the geopolitical landscape shifting dramatically since then, Reform UK and its leadership see Trump's return as an opportunity rather than a liability. Tice's remarks reflect a broader push from the right-wing populist movement in the UK, which is increasingly aligning itself with Trumpian politics, emphasizing national sovereignty, border security, and economic self-determination. Like it or not, Trump remains a significant figure in global politics, Tice continued. The idea that Britain should snub him is short-sighted and damaging to our own interests. The royal family has yet to comment on the growing political storm surrounding Trump's potential visit, and Downing Street remains tight-lipped on whether Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will meet with the former president should he make the trip. One thing is clear: Trump's presence in the UK, whether welcomed or not, is unlikely to go unnoticed, and Reform UK is more than willing to plant its flag in his corner.